Welcome to The Breach Show, featuring sharp analysis on politics and social movements in Canada. I'm your host, Martin Lukacs. Today, I'm speaking with Judy Rebick, a longtime feminist and socialist activist, broadcaster, and author. We're talking on the verge of the NDP's convention this weekend in Winnipeg, where party members will be voting on a new leader. Among the candidates is Avi Lewis, who has been campaigning for a new, unapologetically left and more democratic NDP. Judy has been an endorser and active supporter of Lewis's campaign, and in full transparency, I've been an advisor to him. But this conversation will take more of a historical approach, trying to mine lessons from Judy's 4 decades plus of involvements and efforts to make the NDP a vehicle for democratic socialism, more connected to the vitality and power of social movements, and more committed to broad transformative change. Judy has done that, sometimes as a critic from the outside, and sometimes as a candidate and change maker from inside it. Welcome to The Breach Show, Judy.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
As we get started, just a reminder to our viewers and listeners to like and subscribe if you want more journalism for transformation. Judy, some might say your involvement in attempts to change the NDP brings to mind Albert Einstein's definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. What makes you keep doing it?
Well, I had decided to stop doing it, but Avi approached me a while back and asked and told me that when Jagmeet stepped down, he was probably going to run for leader, and asked if I'd support him. And I said, I've had it, Avi. I've tried too many times. I'm really glad you're doing it. I hope you succeed, but there's no way that I'm getting involved in this, right? I'm 80 years old, right? So I have to limit my energy output. And then when he actually was about to announce that he was running, he met with a group of us who had been critics historically and made his argument. And the argument was that we had never tried to combine a leadership campaign with a grassroots transformational campaign. So rather than saying do the same thing over and over again, it was kind of like, okay, I've been trying to do this for decades, and now maybe there's an opportunity to do it. I did go to his kickoff meeting in Toronto. Look, it was incredible. I don't remember being at a meeting with that kind of energy since the first time we brought Dr. Morgenthaler to Toronto to open an illegal abortion clinic. Okay. So I have a real sense of what a real movement feels like. And that's what it felt like to me. So that's when I decided to get more involved.
We'll come back, I think, towards the end maybe and talk about the Avi Lewis campaign. But let's go back 40 years. In the mid-'80s, you were a leader in that pro-choice movement, working alongside Morgenthaler. And at that time, you became active in the campaign for an activist party within the Ontario NDP. What, at that time, were you pushing for with respect to the NDP?
Well, the first thing, I first joined to get the NDP to reverse its position on the Morgenthaler clinic, because Bob Rae had taken this position that he supports choice, but we have to defend the rule of law. It was one of the great moments of my political career that he was booed off the stage for saying that.
The leader of the NDP at the time.
At the time, yeah, but it was a ridiculous statement. But anyway, so we decided in the Ontario Coalition of Abortion Clinics that we had to get involved in the NDP Women's Committee, which did support choice on abortion, and fight for the party to change its position. And that's when I got involved. I joined the committee. Mary Rolls was the leader. Bob Rae tried to defeat her and failed because the union women were on our side, which has been a key to the victory on abortion. And then I got involved in the party because I was on the women's committee, and that was a big fight, and we won it. We won it inside the party. And then the NDP government became an important ally when they were elected. I can't remember exactly how the campaign for an activist party started. We had a sense that the NDP was getting stronger and that there was a real chance at government. And we felt that there were a series of changes we wanted to make. And we also thought, and even in those early days in the 80s, that the NDP should have a similar relationship to the social movements, like the feminist movement, as it had to the labor movement. And I was very aware of that because of the role the labor movement played in winning the pro-choice struggle. We hadn't won at that point, but in strengthening it. And so I thought, well, why stop at the labor movement? Why not have relationships with other social movements? And the thing was that the union women were strongly in favor of my leadership. And he tried to get one of them to run against me, but they all refused. So they re-ran the old president, Gillian Sanderman, her name was. She was actually living in Jamaica. It was really ridiculous. And there were 1,500 people at that convention. It wasn't a leadership convention, it was unheard of because they mobilized all the unions to come and vote against me, which I guess was some kind of compliment. But anyway, when I stood up to spoke, I made a joke and I said, "Who says the left never helps to finance the party? Look at this, 1,500 people at a convention." Nobody laughed. That's how tense it was. Anyway, I didn't win. And it was a really transformative experience because we ran a campaign, I guess a little bit like Avi's doing now, not, at the breadth, but we had a feminist canvas where we went to door and we asked to speak of the woman of the house. And we especially focused on social housing, right? And it was fascinating because we asked to speak to the women of the house. And if there was a man at home, they would always stand behind. And also, the other thing that really was interesting was that they treated me like they really talked to me about what was bothering them, what they thought, what their problems were, how they thought the government could solve their problems. It was really a fascinating experience, very educational for me. Because often in social movements, you're working with people who already agree with you, or at least they're at least interested in what you're doing. But when you run for office, and I think when you go door to door in any kind of campaigning, you talk to ordinary people who maybe even haven't thought about it. It was really politicizing for me. Then we had a disability canvas, which I don't think anybody's had before. Certainly no one had before, and I don't think anybody's had it since.
Hmm.
So we had people who were using wheelchairs, blind people, deaf people, even people with intellectual disabilities, going door to door, promoting my candidacy, and that too was very successful. And the people doing it just loved it. The reason I was involved in that is I worked for the Canadian Hearing Society, and at that time we were organizing a coalition for employment equity for people with disabilities. So I was involved politically with the disabled community. And it, like I say, it was a really wonderful experience for me. So then I ran again federally because by this point, this was at the end of the 80s. We hadn't won yet at the court level, but it was mostly in court. The clinic was running. We had a good system, everything, we had huge popular support. So they didn't really need me anymore. And I had to resign as spokesperson for the pro-choice struggle. Yeah, I ran federally for the nomination in Scarborough West, but I lost the nomination by 3 votes. I was disappointed at the moment, but not for very long, because a couple of months later, they asked me to run for president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, and I was able to fight Mulroney much better as president of the largest women's group in the country than I could have as a backbench NDPer.
And then you continued your involvement in social movements through NAC. In 1993, the NDP got routed in that federal election, and similarly to today, lost its official party status. There was a renewal conference held a year later in 1994, and you submitted an essay that we dug out of the archives.
Amazing.
It was entitled "Your Mission, Should You Accept It?" And you wrote in that, in language I find incredibly fresh, despite considerable evidence to the contrary, NDP leaders have often decided that power can only be achieved by moving the NDP to the political center, where it can receive approval from the media and political pundits. In the 1990s, with the political center moving quickly to the right, it is getting hard to tell the difference among parties without a program. In this paper, I will argue that a broader basis than ever in Canada exists for a democratic socialist party that has a bold and clear vision. Achieving power and effecting social change are not conflicting goals, although the road to achieving both may look very different than where we have been traveling in the last decade. Failing to redefine a democratic socialist vision that permitted a slide of social democratic parties to the right and loss of large numbers of their traditional constituents to liberal parties or right-wing populist ones.
Amazing, eh? No, I was amazed when I read it because it's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. It also surprised me because I'd completely forgotten about it. I remember speaking at the conference, but I don't remember writing the paper. Avi's doing a lot of what I said needed to be done.
The 1990s were this moment of triumphalist, neoliberal capitalism. Probably the most deep restructuring, neoliberal restructuring, was undertaken by the liberals in the mid 90s, and the NDP, was pulled in that rightward tow. In 1997, you were involved in supporting what was arguably the last real left wing leadership run within the NDP, which was Sven Robinson's run. Sven was a trailblazing socialist MP, the first openly gay MP.
Well, Sven is an amazing politician because he always stood up for what he believed in. And that was so rare. I mean, the most amazing thing he did was vote against the notwithstanding clause on the Constitution when everybody in the NDP voted for it, right? It's very hard for a politician to do that. And it's very hard for a politician to stand, because Sven didn't come out of social movements, really. He ran when he was very young. He was able to stand up against all odds. The campaign then was organized mainly in the ridings, right? And then on the convention floor, a lot of the organizing happened. A lot of the arguments happened. A lot of people went to convention, maybe not even being sure they're going to vote for, right? And
Oh, maybe
and
we
there
should
was,
clarify. Let's just
sorry,
clarify for listeners that at the time, unlike today, where one member of the NDP gets one vote for a leader, at the time it was a delegated convention
that's
where
right.
delegates were nominated by their particular riding and they went to convention and the vote for potential leader happened on the floor.
Exactly. So what happened was Sven came first on the first ballot. He had a lot of young people support him. He had a lot of support. But the other two candidates were Alexa McDonough, who was a woman from Nova Scotia, and Lorne Nystrom, who was an MP from Saskatchewan. And Alexa and Lorne made a deal with Alexa that all his people would go for her. And Sven, without consulting with anybody, I'm still annoyed about that, um, decided to cede to Alexa because he knew he couldn't win. We've talked before about the conflict between electoral politics and movement politics. The problem with that was Sven had really mobilized a lot of young people to support him, and they did not understand what he did, and they felt sold out. They felt betrayed, like really serious betrayal, right? For him, it was just why bother going through a second vote when you knew you weren't going to win, right? It was just a practical decision, right? And plus a way to get back in the graces of the party that didn't cost him anything, right?
So the
In
par- the
his
part the
view.
part the
Yeah,
party's establishment worried about the possibility of a left-wing leader like Sven
totally,
Robinson and
totally.
basically
Yeah.
orchestrated a gang up between the second and third place contestants, one of whom was more centrist and one of whom was, tended toward the right of the party.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not aware of how it happened. I just know that it did happen. You're probably right.
I mean, the apocryphal story I know is, in
Yeah.
fact, it was a member of the Lewis family, Michael Lewis, Avi's uncle, who
Oh,
was a key
yes.
organizer within the United Steelworkers Union, who was responsible for orchestrating that gang up on Sven Robinson.
I'm not surprised.
And so Sven gave it up before it even reached the
Ballot.
final
Yeah.
ballot, and Alexa McDonough became the next leader of the NDP. And so ended, your second, I guess, effort, or at first at the federal level, to try to transform the NDP. That brings us in the historical arc to probably the most ambitious effort that you were involved in to try to transform the federal party, which was the New Politics Initiative.
Yeah.
So in the wake of, an emergent anti-globalization movement in the late 1990s that was decrying the inequities of neoliberal capitalism, you were part of an initiative to try to marshal the energy of that movement and use it to reinvent the NDP, to open it up to more participatory energies of social movements. It was called the New Politics Initiative, the NPI.
Yeah. So Jim Stanford, who at the time was pretty young and was an economist for the CAW, and I knew him.
The
So he
Canadian
and
Auto Workers.
Canadian Auto Workers, yeah, right. I forget. Now it's called Unifor. And we were on a demonstration. And as we were walking, we just started to talk about how maybe it was a good time to try and push for change in the NDP because we had this huge, I mean, it was global. Like we hadn't seen a global movement like that before. I mean, there was against the war in Vietnam, but we didn't have the ability to see it the way we did then. And Seattle, it was huge demonstrations all over, all over Europe against free trade, what we called free trade, against globalization, right? Earlier in Canada, it was against free trade, and then globally, it was against globalization. Or later, we called it corporate globalization. And that maybe this would be a good time, NDP convention coming up, I don't know, I think it was 6 months, to try and organize a change in the party. Again, we tried to do it at a grassroots level. And our idea was when the Green Party finally got elected, was around then, I think. And we thought, well, why have a different party? Like maybe the NDP should refound itself in this new moment and join with the Green Party, just like the CCF refounded itself and joined with the labor movement, right? And that was our initial idea. But Jim couldn't sell that to Buzz Hargrove, who was the president of CAW at the time. But he could sell to Buzz Hargrove the kind of change we were talking about. And that was really important within the party. And that was important because, as I say, when I ran the last time, CAP was defeated by the labor movement. So to have labor support was important. And the CAW was one of the key unions in the NDP. And so we had a meeting, and a couple of young people who, I did know one of them, which was Naomi Klein, and the other one was Dave Meslin. So very strong leaders, right? Came to the first meeting we had, or we invited them, I don't remember. And we decided to organize a real movement to do this. And we had meetings in Toronto and Winnipeg and Vancouver, Halifax, Regina. I mean, we didn't have money or anything. It was all volunteer. So we didn't travel, but we did get people we knew across the country to organize meetings. And we came to the convention. And the Friday night of the convention, I was having lunch with Sven a couple of years ago, and he said that Friday night of that convention was the highlight of my political career. It was 500 people we had at this meeting, very diverse at the time, age diverse and gender diverse was more how we saw diversity, right? Still then. And it was really inspiring and fun too. And we got very excited about it, right? Because we thought, wow, we've got real momentum now. We've got real momentum going into the convention. I was not a member of the NDP at that time because we had the idea that the NPI should organize people outside the party and people inside the party together, not asking people to join the NDP at that moment, right? If we had changed the NDP, we would have asked them to join, but we weren't asking them to join. And so in order to show that, I didn't rejoin the party, right? Because I had quit. And I think that was a mistake because I wasn't able to speak at the convention. And there was a big debate on an NPI resolution at the convention. And I mean, it wasn't, I think we got 40% of the vote. And this was a vote to transform the party. It wasn't a vote to make a few changes, right? It was clear what it was. And the only reason we didn't win was because they had all the labor support, except for the CAW. And then what happened was I had asked Jack Layton was a good friend of mine, and I asked him, this is before he ran for leader, I asked him if he would join the NPI because I thought he agreed with most of what we were saying. And he said, well, I do agree with you, Judy, but I can't join because I'm running for leader, right? And he in fact did run for leader, and as everybody knows, he won. And when he initially won, he tried to carry out this notion a little bit, in terms of speaking. He spoke at anti-war demos and so on, but he very quickly changed his views. He was influenced by the staff and by the political world. And I mean, it's something I think that a lot of activists don't understand, that once you're elected, you get into this other world and it looks very different. And all the experts in that world tell you you can't be radical, you can't do it. You have to pay attention to the polls. It's really hard to keep a good judgment, right? Because they keep telling you, no, if you do that, you'll lose next time, we'll lose, you're going to ruin the party, blah, blah, blah.
Jack really surrounded
Jack,
himself by that kind of emergent consultant class within the
yeah,
NDP from a very early
totally,
stage.
totally. And he moved, I think he ruined the party. That's my view. I know people think, oh, yeah, we have to be like Jack. But he was the one who professionalized the party, who relied so much on professional staff. And that's what happened, right? They became more and more like the liberals and had less and less connection to any movements.
So, in other words, the NPI as a initiative was defeated. Jack
Hmm.
co-opted some of the energy, and if anything, as you
For
say,
sure.
it was
Yeah.
it was his reputation as an activist before he ran for leader that actually allowed him, that gave him cover to take the party in a more moderate direction, to centralize control.
Like the thing about Jack that was amazing was he just loved people. Like I've been in airports with politicians a few times. And the difference with Jack was like with most politicians, somebody will come over, oh, aren't you so and so? And they'd be polite and how are you? Nice to meet you. Oh, you want me to sign? Not Jack. Jack would go into the bar, buy people drinks, yak away. He just loved people, and that came across. And so that was his popularity. It had nothing to, my view, it had nothing to do with his politics. It was to do with the guy was just so charming and loving, and he was wonderful. He really was. And I mean, I didn't agree with him, but I loved him, right? And that's why he won.
During Jack's leadership and in the wake of it, the party, as you say, turned into a bit of a liberal light formation.
Mhm.
And you shifted, I think, more to an overtly critic role over those years, the last 20 years.
Well, I mean, first you had Mulcair, who in my view was a liberal. He was never really a social democrat, let alone a democratic socialist. And also, he was not a very popular guy or a very personable guy, but he was from Quebec. And so the professionalization that Jack started continued with him. And plus, he had absolutely no interest in any kind of social change. He just wanted power. And so the party became less and less connected to any kind of movements, except the labor movement. And the party became less and less a socialist party or a Democratic Party for that matter, in my view. So I was very critical. So, for example, in Ontario, when the NDP as the opposition tried to defeat a liberal Kathleen Wynne, and the NDP came out attacking her, attacking her budget. And
On
so
spending in particular, on spending.
yeah, on spending. And so, very right-wing attack, right? And so a number of us, and I was one of them, I don't remember organizing it, but I did sign a letter critically, and I was very well known at the time, but it was very important to do that. When you don't agree with the party you support, you've got to criticize them. If they don't listen to your criticism, you got to criticize them publicly.
Let me bring you to the present, which is the current NDP leadership race. You've endorsed Avi Lewis's campaign. You've been involved.
Well, I've never seen a campaign like this. Like I can say, like at the beginning of the campaign, I felt Avi had a great perspective because he's talking about he had good policy issues. He's talking about reviving the base. He's talking about creating riding associations as organizing hubs. Because they used to be, to a certain degree, organizing hubs, and that's completely gone now because they haven't had the resources they needed. So I liked what he was saying. But the first meeting, I realized that something was happening, because I spoke at the first meeting in Toronto and the energy in the room was phenomenal. I hadn't felt energy like that in a meeting. I'd felt it in the Palestinian marches, in the Gaza marches, but I hadn't felt it in a meeting since the Morgenthaler days, right? All these in-person meetings, which are phenomenal. And they're all like, I think part of it is COVID and we don't get together very often anymore. So when you're in a room where you feel the energy of other people, you have common cause, it is joyous. And right now, boy, do we need some joy in our lives, right? Given what's happening in the world. And so it's amazing. It's so powerful, right? And then the speakers are always really good. And then integrating art and music into it has been phenomenal. And then on top of the in-person meetings, there's all these online meetings, which are kind of like, some of them are kind of like an education for the organizers, right? They're organizing meetings, but also they're about issues that people can learn about. Like I went to one last Friday, I think, on the unions, and it was terrific, right? And if you were a student, let's say, didn't know anything about the labor movement, it was perfect, right? And so I just think it's a wonderful campaign that Avi consistently focuses on. It's not just about the leader and it's not just about the party. And that nobody's ever said it. Sven never said that, right? Nobody's ever said that. To my knowledge, nobody's ever said that who had any chance of winning the leadership. To say the NDP is part of a movement for social change. That's what we want. We're going to work with other social movements. And that was our original vision in the NPI. But now it's happening, right? In Avi's campaign. And so, and it gives me a feeling, kind of like the Mamdani campaign did in New York, that despite this rise of fascism and this horrible war that's going on, there's hope for change, that we can build a really broad movement.
Let's try to look at things with a bit more I'm gonna say skepticism, but clear-eyedness. So I mean, leaders of social democratic or democratic socialist parties
Yeah.
do come under enormous pressure in, capitalist liberal democracies, both from the corporate class as well as the media. And in the NDP's case, from wings, provincial sections, parts of,
Yeah.
labor officialdom. How do you think it might be possible for, a new NDP leader not to be bent and moderated under those pressures?
Well, I think continuing the organization around him, the team that's around him, continuing somehow for that team to continue to exist. I'm not sure how. And the links to the movement activists that are involved, who may not be on staff or anything, but who have been engaged in the campaign. I think that's key. So that it's not, like obviously, it's not just about me. Let's make it not just about him. Then for some of the people who have been supporting him to run, so that he has allies. I mean, I think there's people already who were running or could run again who would be allies in this. But people in his caucus he should have people in the caucus who are supporting what he's doing. Otherwise, it'd be very hard to do. And to not focus on internal party dynamics if once he gets elected, but to focus on building the ridings as real active parts of the party. So to focus on rebuilding the party at first. I don't think there's going to be an election soon. Why would Carney? I mean, Carney's got everything he wants. Why would he hold an election? And to create a presence for himself. And I don't think Avi will have a hard time doing it. I think once he's leader of the NDP, he'll get attention. You know what I mean? I mean, I got attention. I was a Trotskyist, and I got attention as a spokesperson of the pro-choice movement. It's true, I practically had to take a knife for it, but I defended Morgenthaler against somebody who was trying to knife him. That's when I
I was
became
going to say for
famous.
some of our
For people
our
who
younger
don't know,
listeners.
yeah, for people who don't know. But anyway, the point being that Avi's charismatic enough, if you want to put it that way, that he'll get attention. So I think the main thing is to rebuild the party in an activist, fun way, the way that the leadership campaign has been. And then I think lots of people will join, even more maybe.
One thing that strikes me, I know that we've talked about before, is that one challenge, apart from the structural or organizational ones, is the ideological or imaginary ones, which is it feels like we live in an era when a huge obstacle is that people have lost the confidence in our collective agency and the possibility
Yeah.
of fundamental social change. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a problem in terms of, like, for example, public grocery. I don't think people have lost. I think there's a discouragement about fundamental social change because, we had Idle No More. It was so powerful, and then it faded. We had Black Lives Matter. It was so powerful. Everybody suddenly was into DEI, and now it's completely being turned back, right? Because those movements were great at mobilizing, but they weren't great at sustaining, right? So people get discouraged. But I think at the political level, I don't think it's so much that as that people have lost confidence in the state.
Mm.
Like, when I was a university graduate, everybody wanted to get a job in the government. Everybody. I mean, not everybody, but it was the best job you could get. Now, nobody wants to work for the government now because they see the government as ineffective. And part of that is propaganda, and part of that is a lack of funding, and part of that is bureaucracy, right? So the government is less effective, and often the only thing they're good at is stopping you from doing things you want to do rather than helping you do things you want to do, right? So I think that's the biggest problem for a democratic socialist campaign once it's in power, is for people to actually believe that a public grocery is going to bring down prices, right? And believe me, if Avi's actually running on that electorally, there's going to be every economist on the face of the earth, with the exception of about five, telling him it's impossible, it can never work. That's how they do it, right? If you listen to experts. So the movement, I call it a movement because I don't want to just say Avi, because he doesn't want to be seen that way either. But the movement around him is going to have to be very strong, not to get discouraged, and to continue to get allies in academia and in other places who can fight that, the kinds of attacks that will be on his policies. And people's cynicism about the public sector, it's a very hard thing to overcome. But if and when he ever gets the chance to do that, I think it'll be amazing. We can really transform things. I was really impressed. The mayor of Paris, a socialist, was just elected the mayor of Paris. So this is something that's happening, right, at a city level. And what he said in his speech was, and thank you for letting the world know that this wonderful, beautiful city will never support the far right, right? And Avi's can have a similar message, because basically Carney's moving to the right so fast, it's hard to even see, it's hard to keep track. And so in his position, so he's got a lot of room to get attention, because he's the only voice even liberal to left. There's not even a liberal voice anymore. Plus, the government's downloading any responsibility for any kind of social justice issues. I'm not optimistic about it, but I think what else? Well, it's the most positive thing that's happening right now anywhere in Canada, in my view, is Avi's campaign. And that's really saying something. I don't think I've ever said that about anything electorally before.
Well, on that paradoxically optimistic note, Judy, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
If you like what you've heard on The Breach Show, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to support our work, please become a sustaining member to help us produce more journalism for transformation. You can do that by going to breachmedia.ca/support. Thanks for listening.